Welcome to the Islam Unravelled Anti-Racism podcast. It's a great honor to have you, Minister, and Minister Maryam Monsef, who's the Minister of Gender Equality and Rural Development. So great to have you. Great to have you as a role model in our community. And I was reading that you're from Peterborough, and I've been to Peterborough. And many years ago, when I was 18, I used to sell door to door, and somehow I wound up in Peterborough. And so I got to know Peterborough very well, and the Black Flies and small town life is it's an interesting life compared to the city. So let's talk about Peterborough and how you came to Peterborough. And I know you ran for mayor in Peterborough, but let's talk about that journey, that early journey in Peterborough.
Well, thanks, Tariq. Salam alaikum. Bonjour, Anin. I'm in Peterborough right now. I'm
Okay.
in my room and it's on Mississauga and Anishinaabe territory. It's May. It's beautiful outside. The sun is shining. The place that I call home is the only place I have ever felt welcomed in. It's the only place I have ever felt like I belong in. And it's a place that gave my family and I a second chance at life. And it's why I decided to run. Peterborough, this is the place at the end of the rapids. This is the land of the shining waters. We're about a 90-minute drive from Toronto. And we are a pretty special place all year round, but especially this time of the year. Tourism operators are hurting, as are so many vulnerable folks, but thanks to the smarts and the resilience of community leaders and a culture here of neighbors looking after neighbors, we're going to be okay. And like so many places across the country, the pandemic has hit this community hard. We've lost loved ones and we haven't been able to come together and grieve. We've, missed out on graduations and weddings and celebrations. But our vaccination rate is moving up. And our public health experts and essential workers have kept it together. This May will mark 25 years since my mom brought us, me and my two sisters, younger sisters, to Peterborough, and this community welcomed us with open arms. I was born an Afghan refugee on Iranian soil, and when my mom lost her husband at the age of 24, part of a crossfire between the borders of Iran and Afghanistan. There weren't too many opportunities for her in Afghanistan, as you can appreciate with the challenges that region and that particular country has faced, and certainly not many opportunities for her as an Afghan refugee. In Iran. So she made a big decision, made a big sacrifice, made a big bet, and it paid off. It's the biggest break my sisters and I will ever get. We came here in '96. This community helped us in really big and small ways. They helped us feel like we weren't alone, like we could start a new life here, like we belonged here. They took us in for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they helped us register for school and find a place to live. And we stayed at shelters and we relied on food banks and we relied on social supports. And when I got the opportunity, as my whole family has, to give back, I took it seriously, and I was able to put my name on a ballot when I was 29 years old and ran for mayor. I did not win. I lost by about 1,300 votes, so every vote matters. And then I ran again with Team Trudeau in 2015. Thanks to an incredible team, we won. And I have been a cabinet minister for the same number of years that I've been an MP. And like all of you, I miss humans, and I can't wait to get rid, put behind, conquer the pandemic so that we can come together again and hug each other and rebuild better what's been broken during the pandemic and what was already broken. So that was
Absolutely.
long-winded. That's what you get, Tariq, for like
No,
a
no,
big
no, no.
question.
You know what? It's in a similar way. I grew up in a small town called Fort St. John in northern British Columbia, and small towns definitely have that intimate community feeling that we don't get in cities. And I think even just appropriate for your role for Minister of Gender Equality and Rural Development is that really the heartbeat of Canada in towns like Peterborough and Fort St. John are just quintessential the Canadian experience, the welcoming feeling and that intimate community relations that you experienced. Now, obviously your family came and there was difficult circumstances behind you arriving, but not everybody takes up the role for public office or to desire to represent in that way, which again, highly commendable and a great honor that you're a member of our community in a high level of public office. What were your role models? What was your influences early on to get you that desire to be somebody who represents in government?
Like so many who get the privilege of putting their name on a ballot, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I have a pretty incredible mother who's shown that doesn't matter how many times life knocks you down, you get back up and you keep moving ahead. I have a really um, big gift in my early years. I got to learn from my grandfather the teachings in the Quran and the teachings in the Torah and the Bible, and he would go through each surah and tell us what the stories meant and what the moral was and what the lesson was. And we'd ask him tough questions like so many listening, right? My childhood memories include family being huddled around a radio, waiting for war to end, right? Waiting, can we go back to Afghanistan? Is the war over? What's happening in Philistine? What's happening in the Middle East, right? Those are memories of my childhood, and I've grown up with that. And family members like my grandfather would treat my sisters and I like adults, even though we were surrounded and part of a culture that didn't value and respect women as equals. He would tell my sisters and I, when we'd ask questions like, "Why are these horrible things happening, Grandpa?" He would say, "It's so that you understand what it's like to feel pain like this, and you'll grow up to prevent it from happening to other people." When we'd ask him questions about, conflict and particularly our faith, he would always draw back to common denominators, and he would always talk about decency and goodness. So certainly family members, but here in Peterborough, Tariq, I have what I hope every single person has, which is a network of mentors and friends and elders and teachers who've taken the time to teach me, who've believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself, who've picked me up when I've fallen, who've brought me back to the ground when I've lost focus. And of course, nobody goes anywhere without a team. So if I have one superpower, it's my ability to bring around me people who are way smarter than me, who care about communities and who care about their country. And if I have been fortunate enough to do something for my community and to give back, it's because I've had all these incredible people in my life before and in my life now. And I really want to take this opportunity, Tara, if I can, to thank my team and those who've been just a phone call away, particularly over the past year. I appreciate you, and you've all got your own hardships, but thank you for all the ways you've helped me up.
And that is a superpower, to bring people together in a meaningful way, and I think to harness group effort and be that heartfelt leader. I think that is a superpower. And just as we talked about, you ran for mayor and you were a close second, and one door closed, but then another door opened, and you were elected, and this was at the Syrian crisis, which Canada, the Liberal government, your government, our government, um, brought in 48,000 refugees that literally, because of other countries and their restrictions and lack of at least certain right-wing kind of governments not accepting refugees, Canada and the government stepped up. Let's talk about that, how in government, as when you assumed office, and the discussions around, we need to help these people in need. And obviously there's a lot of mothers, a lot of women that were also just families, like the heartbeat of the family is the mother. So let's talk about those discussions and this effort to really help the people in dire need, to bring them to Canada.
I think we all remember where we were when the photo of the body of that little boy, Alan Kurdi, was on the cover of Globe and Mail. And I think Canadians, there was a collective gasp in the middle of the 2015 campaign. And I saw here in Peterborough how ordinary people were mobilizing and saying, we need to do more, we want to do more. And, you know, when the election was determined, when we formed government, the Prime Minister asked me to be one of his cabinet ministers, the first Muslim around that table, but not the last. Ahmed Hussein is there, Omar Al-Ghabra is there, and there will be many, many more in the years to come, I am sure. But he also asked me to sit and be part of the work that the ad hoc refugee helping with the Syrian settlement. So that was an incredible opportunity. And I got to see the public service of Canada early on at its best. I got to see communities across the country, Canadians at their best. Warehouses that had been turned into a welcoming center where our Syrian neighbors would get off the plane and go into this place and somebody would be there. And I'll never forget, welcome to Canada, welcome to Canada. And they get their lanyard and then they'd be guided to, here's where you can go charge your phones, and here's where you can go to like sign up, and if you need to lie down or if you need medical help, and let us take you to where clothes and shoes and winter wear would be. And it was just, that was incredible. And it happened because the public service really ramped it up. The Prime Minister said, I know folks say we can't do this, but I need you to try. And people did. And Canadians stepped up, and the private sponsors helped increase the number of government supported refugees coming in, and the volunteer groups that kind of wrapped around each family as they helped settle them. That network continues today, and I sincerely believe that our Syrian Canadian friends brought out the best in all of us. And the Prime Minister at the time, of course, you recall, we were up against another government that cast doubt on whether or not a Canadian was a Canadian was a Canadian. The barbaric practices hotline, the old Bill C-51, the dog whistle politics that happened, the pitting of the neighbor against neighbor strategy for political gain. That was all happening. And the Prime Minister really stepped up. And fast forward 6-7 years later, it is most definitely a difficult time for all Canadians, for everybody around the world. For Muslims, I know aid has been incredibly difficult. The conflicts in our respective ancestral lands, what's happening in Palestine, I hope that the people who are listening remember that it is because of them, it is because of Canadians who rejected that way of doing business that things have changed. And hopefully we'll never go back to that kind of divisive politics around Muslim identity again. We are actively acknowledging that words like Islamophobia, they exist, It's a word, but also Islamophobia, the form of racism and hate, is deeply hurtful to all of us. So the progress we have to protect, I believe, is one of the most important tasks we collectively have as individuals and as leaders.
And with yourself at the table, and just with the lesson of coming to Canada, and for your voice at the table of government, I'm sure had a big influence to share your experience with your other colleagues and the Prime Minister, and to really go full circle, where to be part of the process to help welcome 48,000 refugees must have been a heartfelt moment to do the same, to be part of the process, to help those in need, that to come to Canada in such a great way, in such a honorable way to welcome, and especially the trauma that people experience when they are in the countries, and to get to safe refuge and safe harbor when other countries won't accept refugees. So again, I think combating racism, as you mentioned, and Islamophobia, is by having seats at important tables to represent our diverse voices and our rich backgrounds. And I think the government has evidenced itself with listening and learning and really delivering for people that are in need. So I will commend yourself and the government for that great work, welcoming the refugees, which again, it's a heartfelt thing. And we all did our parts here with faith-based groups to sponsor refugees. And let's talk about your role as the Minister of Gender Equality. And I have two daughters. My wife is an educator, and so and again, we all know who the decision makers are in the house. So
Your daughters? Are you talking about your daughters? Because I see my nieces and they run the show.
my 4-year-old daughter, anything goes. Whatever she wants, she's the boss. But let's talk about this role. You've had very big roles, Minister of International Development, and now this role for gender equality. What are the lessons learned? And obviously, you have a big mandate in your roles, but in these high levels of leadership, what are the lessons you've learned, and your goals and mission to really in your role to be able to accomplish and deliver here in Canada?
Oh my goodness. Lesson learned during COVID. One is care, as Kate Bazanson would say, care is core to who we are, and it is at the core of our economy. These educators like your wife, caregivers, whether in long-term care, in child care settings, in disability supports and services, gender-based violence care workers, health workers, first responders, those who look after our loved ones, and those who take care of us in our most vulnerable and in need moments in life. They help run the rest of our economies and our communities. They include volunteers and they include unpaid care workers. And I think one of the takeaways from the pandemic that I truly hope we never ever forget is that these care workers, these caregivers, mostly women, have carried the overwhelming majority of the pandemic for the rest of us. I salute them. I thank them, as we all do. May we never forget how incredibly valuable their work is. The pandemic has also shown us that women have been hit hard in other ways. They lost jobs first and the most, and the decline in labor market participation of women continues. The pandemic showed us that women, particularly in precarious employment, those in sectors such as tourism and hospitality and care work, as I said, have been hit hardest. And if you're young, and if you've got a disability, and if you live in a rural community, and if your status is precarious and you happen to be LGBTQ, these intersecting identities created vulnerabilities for folks pre-COVID. Those vulnerabilities were exacerbated because of COVID. And then, of course, the thing that haunts and haunted me, particularly at the beginning of COVID, was that whenever there's a natural disaster, rates of gender-based violence go up. Violence against women goes up. Now we see with our kids online more, rates of child exploitation, particularly sexually online, has increased, and we see what's happening with increases in human trafficking. So COVID has taught us really difficult lessons, and it's also taught us that in Canada, we benefit from systems that were created by those who had the foresight and the wisdom before us to create them. Our healthcare system, my goodness, imagine if we didn't have a universal healthcare system. Imagine if our public health systems weren't able to communicate with each other. The investments in high-speed internet and that system of online networks has allowed us, most of us, though not all rural communities, about 2/3 of rural communities are without high-speed internet, but high-speed internet and care workers held our economy together during the pandemic. So there are a lot of lessons learned, including the fact that Canadians are tough. We are tough, resilient people. And as you said, Tara, we also look out for each other in smaller communities, and otherwise we are at our best when we look after each other. And I think another hard one lesson that we learned, particularly if you reflect on that first week in January, that democracy matters. Governments matter. And at our best, at our healthiest, our democracies enable governments like we have stay connected with citizens, listen to their pains and their struggles and aspirations, put forward responses as quickly as possible, and then pivot as we hear what we need to do to improve things. So women at the heart of this work, care core to who we are. Women hit hardest, of course, but we're also seeing that Canadians are strong, resilient people, and that our institutions, for all the ways they need to continue to be improved, have served us well. And we must continue to protect these systems and build even stronger ones so that we're ready for, God forbid, but be ready for the eventuality of another pandemic and another crisis, because seeds we plant today pay off multiple fold in the future.
And I will say the government has been very responsive to the needs of the people in so many ways, financially, with support for businesses and individuals, and also programs for mental health across the board. So let's also talk about an important issue about reconciliation with First Nations, and these are lands that we're guests on, and you know, you brought up Philistine, and obviously the lessons that we learned around the world and here in Canada, but our First Nations brothers and sisters, and the work the government's doing in reconciliation. Let's talk about that.
There's no relationship more important to Canada than that with the First Peoples of this land. And that relationship has been a difficult one for hundreds of years. First Nation, Inuit, and Métis leaders are at the table now. And they and their teams have worked really hard, particularly during the pandemic. We've truly worked hard to implement a nation-to-nation approach to pandemic response and delivery, whether it's in limiting community spread, vaccination, testing and tracing, and other infrastructure supports. And that relationship building continues. And, you know, I want to thank Indigenous leaders for their commitment, particularly Indigenous women's organizations. We are still, though, as we respond to COVID, we're keeping our eye on the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation report and from the MMIWG report. We're lifting boil water advisories. Last I checked, and I go on that website regularly, I just Google boil water advisories Canada, and our tracker comes up. More than 100 boiled water advisories have been lifted. Dozens more are on their way to being lifted. In communities like mine, Curve Lake First Nation for decades fought for the acknowledgement that they had a boil water issue. And now, they've received funding and they're designing what their water treatment plan looks like. Um, all of BC boiled water advisories, by the way, have been lifted. A few weeks ago, we announced, Minister Bennett and I, that we're closing the gaps along highways of tears, stretches of highway across the country, and we started with BC, where because of no cell service, women, particularly Indigenous women and girls, found themselves unable to call for help, unable to, find their way if they had been lost. And their predators planned for that, took advantage of that. And for decades, families were saying, regional development organizations, tourism operators were saying, fix these gaps because our daughters are missing, our daughters are gone, and this can be prevented. And we're doing that, and we're doing that in partnership with provinces and communities themselves. I've been so fortunate to represent Canada at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women for the past 3 years, and we've made sure that Indigenous representation is there as part of the Canadian delegation. We've signed memorandums of understanding, and we have invested in over 100 Indigenous women's organizations. There's commitments in the budget to move forward with Indigenous policing, First Nation policing, with an Indigenous-led healthcare system, to invest $18 billion more dollars to close the infrastructure and other gaps that exist. And we do so because it is our duty, it is our responsibility, but also because it's in Canada's best interest. When Indigenous communities and individuals do well, all of Canada is from Afghans and other ethnic groups, that Canada's path to reconciliation, the leadership of Indigenous folks, is providing a blueprint for others around the world to follow. It's a difficult path, it's a long path. We all have to walk together, but Canada and the Indigenous peoples of this land are leading. And no, we won't undo hundreds of years of racism and colonialism and sexism and misogyny in just a handful of years, but we sure can build a foundation, and we sure can wrong the rights, right the wrongs, and we sure can respond to the MMIWG calls, and much of the suffering can be prevented. And it's if I can, Chief Wheatung and Chief Carr here in my own community and those who've come before them have been strong leaders, and I'm always impressed and grateful and a little surprised that Indigenous leaders continue to take our call and continue to work with us and continue to guide us and advise us, because this relationship has been strained and unfair for so long. I appreciate the partnership, as I know all my colleagues do, because there is so much more work to be done.
Well, and the work is being done, and again, commendable to the government for its many commitments to diversity, inclusion, reconciliation. And in respect of your time, the other big existential issue facing all of us is climate change and the climate emergency, and how, even although race and reconciliation has many facets, but the environment affects everyone equally, regardless of religion and color. And the government is progressive, and the government is working progressively on environmental issues. What are the government in your respective roles working with all communities to address the climate emergency?
Well, first of all, the debate is over as to whether or not climate change is real. You can be sure that the Liberal Party and the Liberal government will always listen to science and expertise, and we've established a plan and a pathway to net zero emissions by 2050. We've invested in protecting our lands, our waters, our oceans. Conservation has been a big focus soon, and this was part of the budget, which I'm holding in my hand right now for the super nerds out there. It's a really big document, but if climate justice and climate action is your thing, and so many have fought for so many years, Chapter 5 in the budget, for me, I hope for you too, is cathartic to just read. You're going to see in Chapter 5 what the government of Canada's plan is to move ahead with a healthy environment for a healthy economy. You're going to see the investments in accelerating net zero transformation through innovation. You're going to see, as I was saying earlier, and then kind of trailed off, this summer, there's going to be supports for homeowners for rentals, investments in clean tech. You're going to see investments in zero emission vehicles and tax incentives for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. You're going to see supporting the production and use of clean fuels. Will continue to price pollution, even though that was a difficult struggle. We went to court with provinces on that, and Canada's approach held up in court. And you're going to see, let me just see, from page 159 to 187 in the budget, you're going to see Canada's plan to getting to net zero by 2050. Why
Wow.
this is important, Tariq, as you said, climate change affects us all, absolutely, but it affects disproportionately those who are vulnerable, whether it's floods or fires, whether it's the disruptions that come economically, and particularly for women and children, climate change affects them hardest. And for those activists and advocates who are on the line, reading Chapter 5 will give you a sense of where we're going. And then as these programs start to be implemented, we need your help to shape these measures so that they are truly inclusive and relevant to local experiences, regional experiences, and they create jobs in the process of fighting climate change. So reach out to us, particularly on this issue, because our children and grandchildren will thank us for it.
Absolutely. And the green economy is something that will help Canada. And I think for the audience, the green economy is actually something everyone can be a part of and help the world at the same time. So, Minister, you've been very gracious with your time. Thank you for joining us today. And we hope to meet you again in person next time you're out here in British Columbia and Vancouver, and be happy to honor you with programs within our various communities. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Tariq. I promise to never ever take for granted rooms filled with like-minded people wanting to make their communities better. So I will look forward to the opportunity to connect with you. Please take care of yourself. Say hi to your wife for me. She's
Yes.
doing really noble work. And maybe someday I'll get to meet those two little girls who run your household.
Yeah, and again, standing on the shoulders of giants, and I told them about our interview today, and they'll be the first to listen to it. That role models like yourself to really get to the highest stations in the country is possible and achievable, and you've done it. So thank you again for the work that you do.